Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Royal Army Museum in Brussels, part of the War Heritage Institute of Belgium. We're taking a look at some of the really rare and interesting firearms in their reserve collection today. And in particular, we've got a model of 1907 Russian Mosin Nagant carbine. Now, this is one of the scarcest patterns of Mosin Nagant that is around today. A substantial number of these were made, but an extremely limited number of them survive today. So this carbine was actually prompted by the Russo-Japanese War. What the Russians found during that conflict was that a lot of their specialty troops, guys who were, say, machine gun crews and artillery crews, were a bit hampered in their duties by being saddled down with these huge, full-length, long Mosin Nagant rifles. Well, their primary job isn't shooting people with an infantry rifle. Their primary job is running their machine gun or their artillery piece, and the rifle is really an emergency backup personal defense weapon. So in a lot of other countries, these sorts of troops had been equipped with short, handy carbines. A good example would be the French with the 1892 Berthier artillery carbines, made for exactly this role. Machine gun crews, artillery crews, these guys. Give them something light and handy because you don't really expect them to use it much anyway. So the Russians decided to adopt this pattern after the Russo-Japanese War. The guns were ordered in 1907, hence their 1907 designation, and they are essentially identical to a Mosin Nagant from approximately here backwards. It is simply the short barrel, 508 millimeters, 19.9 inches, that makes them way handier than the standard full-length M91 rifles. So let's take a closer look at this. This is actually a second pattern, and I'll show you what that means. We'll start by taking a look at the receiver markings here. We've got the Tsarist crest. We have the name of the arsenal. These were all manufactured by the Izhevsk Arsenal. We have date of production, which is 1913 for this example, the Izhevsk crest there, or arsenal mark, and then the serial number. Now the serial numbers restarted at 1 every year, so you can't look at you can't look at just the number and identify where it was in production. You need the year and the serial number. The receiver is totally standard, identical to the M91. Bolts are identical, magazines are identical. You will find the magazine serial numbered, the bolts serial numbered, and the cocking piece is also actually serial numbered. It's the front end of the rifle where we will find all the differences. So we have a handguard that comes back and completely encircles the rear sight. You'll find this also on the Dragoon and Cossack rifles. They did this early on. The rear sight itself is a bit different from the Mosin Nagant sights that we're used to. This is really the same sort of pattern as you'll find on, say, Mauser carbines. So you have a battle sight here, and then you can adjust this riser, which is just tensioned in place. This one's actually pretty loose. And that allows you to sight out to, in this case, 2,000 arshins. The arshin was a Russian unit of measure, a bit shorter than a meter or a yard, roughly equivalent to a pace. Now the 2,000 arshin sight here indicates that this is the second pattern of rifle, which we would also know from the 1913 date. But what happened was that in 1908, Russia switched from a round nose ball cartridge to a pointed Spitzer ball cartridge. That significantly changed the ballistics of the round. They went from a relatively slow, heavy projectile to a relatively light, fast one, and so they had to recalibrate the sights. First pattern 1907 carbines have a sight that only goes up to 1900 arshin because of the lower velocity of the cartridge. Similarly, they discovered that the new Spitzer ammunition was a bit rougher on the guns, a bit harder on the guns under recoil than the early original ammunition, and so about 1910 they added stock recoil bolts to the guns. So again, we would expect this carbine to have the recoil lug because it's a post-1910 production, but early pre-1910 manufactured guns don't have the recoil lugs, except that some were refurbished with them after the fact. So a proper first pattern 1907 carbine would not have that lug installed, but those are even rarer to find than any other kind of 1907s. We've got two barrel bands here held in place by flat springs. There's one. There's our front barrel band. Real stub nose on this thing, fairly distinctive. No bayonet lug, of course. These carbines weren't intended to be used with bayonets. We do have a specifically short cleaning rod made for these guns, just like the regular M91s, and a really tall barleycorn style front sight. Slings were held on by the same sort of leather collar arrangement that was used on the M91, so there will be a slot through the stock here at the front, and also one at the back. There were originally stock cartouches on these guns. This one, unfortunately, and most of them these days, is worn beyond the point of being readable. Ultimately, there were a number of problems in service with these rifles. They weren't considered particularly successful. Harsh recoil, significant muzzle flash, those sorts of issues. The same things that you would see with, for example, the original German carbines, Mauser carbines, when they were first converted over to 8mm Mauser Spitzer ammunition. Heavy recoil, heavy flash, to the point that the carbines were sort of abandoned by the Germans in favor of a short rifle. Well, same sort of thing with the 1907 carbines. Once World War I production began, they stopped bothering to produce these. Production of the 1907 carbines ended in 1914. Not very many of them were made in 1914 either. They didn't bother to produce these during the war. The idea of a carbine really just wasn't that important. It was more important to standardize the production lines and make one pattern of rifle during the Great War, which would be the M91, and just give it to everybody. Who cares if it's a little less efficient? It's more important to have that many guns available. So total production was about 344,000. It's interesting that very, very few of those survive today. There's something like less than 24 of them documented to still exist in the United States, plus a few of them in other museums, probably more of them still in Russia than in the United States. But very scarce, very cool guns to take a look at. The Russians would, of course, come back with new carbine patterns during and after World War II with the M38 and M44 carbines, where they kind of got back to this notion of, you know what, Mosin Nagant's really kind of an overly long rifle. Maybe we can make something a little bit more convenient. But it's very cool to get a chance to take a look at an intact, original condition 1907. A big thanks to the Belgian Army Museum for giving me the opportunity here. They have a fantastic display of small arms, uniforms, vehicles, and heavy weapons, World War I and World War II and beyond. If you're in Brussels, I would highly recommend taking a chance to stop by and check out the museum. Hopefully you liked the video. Thanks for watching.